Welcome to Sustainable Packaging Podcast with Cory Connors. I'd like to introduce my very good friend, Mr. Alex Reed. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Cory. Thanks for having me on here.
Thank you so much for taking some time. I'm a huge fan of yours, and we'll get into your history, but I want to kind of speak to what you're doing now. You're a growth consultant. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right. So I spent the first 10 years of my career at a company called Big Ass Fans, really well known for the name and pretty
Yeah,
innovative products. And we did
great
some cool
company.
packaging things there too. And then when that business sold in 2017, a former COO and I started our own direct to consumer product, which packaging was a linchpin of what we were doing there. And we exited that business in March of 2021. So just several months ago. And I've been helping out several businesses, early stage on up to billion-dollar brands in all things marketing, packaging, direct to consumer capabilities, and having a good time solving other people's problems for a change.
Well, the best way to learn is to teach, right? So you're learning as well, and that's amazing. You've really developed an amazing reputation in the industry, and I'm so excited to learn about the story of the Trumans packaging. I think that was incredibly innovative. Can you walk us through how you guys kind of developed that and how it came to be?
Yeah, I'd love to because it's such a fun story. Because John, my co-founder, and we didn't really have traditional packaging backgrounds. We had been in physical goods, so of course, it was part of our purview and what we did. But by no means were we packaging experts. And when we started looking at the requirements, we built this brand and the product line from scratch. Well, obviously, we wanted to cut down our shipping costs as a direct to consumer business, where a big expense of ours is the postage, just getting it from point A to point B.
Right.
So objective number one was, how do we take any dead space out of this thing? Objective two was, how do we reduce any excess material, or whether it's ink or packaging material and whatnot. And so backing up, these are cleaning products with refills. And so our first shipment is one of each cleaner, tiny little refill cartridges about the size of a chapstick tube, and then the bottles, obviously the spray bottles, which takes up the most space. And so we started playing around with different configurations in my garage, not in like an Apple Google kind of way, it's not that complex, but we were literally cutting holes in some, I don't know, they were Amazon boxes that we had, and trying to figure out how we could self-contain the bottles and the cartridges without any extra material in there. And we came up with some pretty cool concepts, ended up partnering with real professionals like you to figure out how to get it done. But I always tell people it's funny because we ended up winning a bunch of design and environmental awards for this package. And we started out of a place of cost reduction and minimalism. Part of that was brand values, but part of that was just pragmatism on behalf of the company, trying to, reduce our unnecessary expenses. So I think it was a good lesson for us that, like, you can create really cool things if you're focused on, minimalism and reducing waste, and the outcome can be an impressive aesthetic design and experience for the customer. So those things aren't always at odds with one another. And that was a really fun learning experience.
Beautiful packaging. Trumans is such a cool concept. So basically, you send it the first time, you send them the bottle, and then with the cartridges. And then the next time, all you have to ship them is the condensed cartridges for each line. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, the concentrate cartridges would come at whatever frequency the customer chose, but in just a small paperboard, almost like a cigarette carton looking thing, and it would ship in an envelope. And so when you think about the impact to a supply chain, whether it's shipping, packaging, warehousing, shelf space, concentrating it and reducing the footprint to that size makes just all the sense in the world, takes so much waste out of that whole supply chain.
This is a concept that kind of started, I feel like it started with clothes washing detergents, where they kept, condensing. And you guys have taken it all the way to the point, or Truman has taken it to the point of not shipping water at all. And I think that, to me, you guys have like gold star, you've reached the end zone. Well done.
Well, thank you. And I hope what we did, one of our ambitious goals when we set out, was to move the entire category in that direction, to where it was, going to at some point be the majority, over 50% of products sold in concentrated form. And you're spot on with, the infamous Tide Pods. But what's interesting about that, because I'd say that's probably 20 years old now, maybe even more, which is crazy. Direct to consumer and e-commerce wasn't as common when that came out. And so you really needed an industry leader like Procter and Gamble to create a concentrated version for it to make sense, because it was all retail shelf driven. And retailers don't like to have 20, 30 different form factors. It can be confusing for the customer. So it took a heavyweight to do it. Now you see a little bit more democratization of access to the consumer. And so there are more startups and big players looking at ways to concentrate their formulas. And so all in all, you're going to see less waste in the supply chain, which is great, better margins for the businesses so they can reinvest and innovate, and better prices and more, less waste for the customer. So it's one of those, I love the story, because a lot of times people think about, environmentalism being at odds with capitalism, and it doesn't have to be that way. So this is a great category to watch, even for, the years to come, to see what happens.
I totally agree. And when we started trying to be sustainable, I've been in this industry for 24 years. When we first started to be sustainable, quote unquote, there was a cost change for that. It was more expensive to get the high PCR content, void fill papers and high PCR air bubbles and things like that. But now, like you said, it is more cost effective to be sustainable if you do it the right way. And this is something that we need to get the word out there.
Yeah, completely. And I get it with new technology. Sometimes it takes economy of scale to bring it back down. There's a lot of industries where you can point to the slow change, but in some of these categories, you're right. It's looking at what can we strip away that is there because of the way it's been sold traditionally, or there's some reason that when you think about it, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense today that we still do it that way. There's a lot of opportunity in the margins.
100%. I just had a conversation last week with a new kind of up and coming drink brand, and the owner was asking me, how do we make this more sustainable? And I said, well, do you have to ship it with the water in it? Can you ship it concentrated? And he said, oh man, that's so crazy, because they had just hired a professional consultant, for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they said the same thing. So, it's like, and I offered this advice at no cost. So I hope he appreciated that.
Well, what I love about that is you can concentrate so many different things, consumer products, food and beverage. And what you'll hear is the same tired excuse of like, oh, well, the water quality can vary, or, customers don't want to take the extra step or don't know. Well, it's the products and the company. It's your job to make it easy to understand, make it easy to use. Like there's a value proposition in there. And, one company that I think executed masterfully over a pretty long period of time was SodaStream, and had a very big exit, I think, to PepsiCo. But that was something that was completely foreign, asking a customer to make their own soft drinks at home. And, there was upfront costs to the customer, but the payback was certainly there. And the environmental waste was, virtually eliminated. So it can be done. It's just a lot of big brands are comfortable with the way things are set up today. And now you're seeing enough scrutiny and push from consumers, and challenger brands come in and offer a better way to do it, that it's not as easy, I think, to just hang on to the way things have always been done as maybe it was 20 years ago. Again, internet's a great equalizer in terms of giving other people opportunities to come in and disrupt.
And I hadn't even thought of SodaStream being a leader in this concept. Thank you so much for that. That is exactly right. I think that's like 20 years old or 15 years old, that concept. And like you said, totally different than what we used to do. For great idea.
Completely. Yeah. And it was what I love about it was when you look at their financials and their growth trajectory, it was such a slow and steady until it wasn't. It was just building a base of users, because again, the equipment was a little bit more expensive up front. But once they hit that inflection point where more of their revenue was coming from their existing base, buying refills, I mean, the business looked phenomenal. And so, again, there's a stickiness to that too, of not only, are we innovating on the product, but we're getting customers who really want to be part of this and are going to be with us for a lifetime. There was a similar thought process, not as big of an upfront investment with Trumans. But, once you've got the bottles and that's all you need besides refills, like switching to something else just doesn't make a whole lot of sense if it works like it's supposed to. And I think SodaStream followed that playbook to a T. And like I said, they did very well because of it.
Such an innovative idea. And like you said, we're eliminating shipping water. And that's, wow, what a mind-blowing concept, but totally necessary, I think, for the future of sustainability.
Yeah, and the shipping, like you said too, it's not just shipping to the retailer. It's, there's warehouses in between. You've got to over package this stuff, then the bottle gets discarded. So you're shipping water, there's fuel, packaging, plastic waste. I mean, it's everything you don't want that can be eliminated by simply taking advantage of the water supply you have at your house.
What a wonderful idea. And I'm asking every guest this question. So I'm excited to hear your answer. Can packaging be sustainable?
I think you'd have to ask the question first, what is sustainability to you?
Right.
Because very few things are sustainable in the sense that they're limitless and they can forever just be, repurposed. At some point, most things become waste.
Right.
You certainly have exclusions to that rule. So I think the framing of that question that I struggle with is that makes sustainability sound like a destination instead of a journey. And I think always trying to improve. And this was something that personally agitated me when we launched Trumans, because we had plans to continue innovating and improving things, but people nitpick at brands and products that are making an authentic effort to be more sustainable. And we should encourage it and promote it and say, consider these things as a next step, because there's always Americans, you can look at, or not Americans, human beings, as long as we've been alive, we innovate and we create. And so let's just keep on that trajectory of how do we reduce, how do we make things more reusable, or how do we eliminate things altogether if they're not necessary. And so I think, packaging can be improved. I think it's more sustainable than it was, or there are options that are more sustainable than there were, 20 years ago. And I think in 20 years from now, hopefully we're saying the same thing about what's considered sustainable today.
I totally agree. Well said. And it's exciting to think about what can happen in the future. We've made some major improvements in the last 10, 20 years. I think we'll continue to grow.
Yeah, material sciences is fascinating. I'm sure, you pay a ton of attention to that. Distribution innovation in terms of reducing, transport time and distances, reusability. Like there's so many different angles that you can approach sustainability with that I can't imagine a future where we haven't made things, more sustainable than they are now.
I totally agree. So this leads right into my next question. What would your advice be for a new company starting out in their journey of sustainability? What's kind of the first couple things that you say, hey, have you looked at this?
Google is your friend.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many people just, they have these questions and they don't even think to go Google it. So you can get a lot of inspiration from what's out there and build on it. I don't think everything has to be a new idea. In fact, I think there very seldom are new ideas. They're just expansions of existing ideas. The other thing I would say is don't follow in our footsteps and reach out for help and get people who know what they're doing. I think we lucked out in a way, and our objectives aligned with sustainability. But if you're not familiar with the packaging world, there are a lot of experts such as yourself and others we've talked about who are very open and willing to help. And I think that's amazing that there's this community of people who want to see the industry go a certain direction. So the first thing I'd say is do your homework, and the second thing I'd say is make connections, reach out to people, and learn from people who have been doing it a lot longer than you have.
I love that. There's so many things available on Google, on YouTube, I had a conversation with my kids last night, and they're 6 years old, 9 years old. And I said, I didn't have the internet when I was your age. And they looked at me like, what? Like I said, we had to look in books and magazines, and we had to call people. So now it's so convenient. It's right at your fingertips. And you're right. There's so much information out there. It's incredible to learn about, you could spend weeks and weeks, and I frankly have researching and learning about different sustainable packaging ideas and concepts and methods and recyclabilities and all that stuff. So,
well, and it's current. when you think about that, and my kids are 6 and 9, by the way, too. So,
Oh,
but when we think about researching for innovation, if you had to do it the way we did traditionally, which is go into the library, the material is outdated already. Whereas, you've got the timestamp on the internet, what the latest is. It really is an amazing tool. And like I said, it's a great equalizer for people that want to come in and shake things up.
100%. And, it's like, there's no excuses anymore. You can find out, keep asking. And there's so many people out there like you and I who want to help. We want to guide. We want to make this world a better, more sustainable place for our kids and for their kids.
Yeah. But I think there's, kind of peeling back the onion there. I think there's a hesitation around appearing, not intelligent, or maybe you're sharing too much and you're worried somebody's going to steal your idea. And to me, all of that is so overblown. I think people like you that are, sharing your knowledge in public, showing what you're working on, draws attention and has this magnetism in a positive way where you make these connections and people want to work with you and collaborate and share ideas. And so, the internet is one big open book, or it can be one open book, but I think people are hesitant for whatever insecurity it is driving that to be that open. And that was one thing that when I think about how we built Trumans, we made sure to do, which was show progress and collect feedback. And I that's another, piece of advice, I guess, which is universally good in business and life is, if you're open and kind and approachable, you'll get a lot of knowledge transfer out of that. And it's always a good thing.
Man, that is so cool. Knowledge transfer. I love that. That's my new mantra. I'm going for knowledge transfer all day long. I'm here to learn. I'm a sponge. I learn something new every day about packaging, about recycling, about what not to do, what to do. You're right. It's unlimited.
That childlike mentality of curiosity it's a skill as an adult, and it has to be, I think, practiced, because we lose a little bit of the wonder. But if you can keep that and keep asking the why questions, you get to some really, really interesting insights.
Yes. I'd love to know your opinions on a couple things. The first one is circular packaging being reusable, and the second is extended producer responsibility.
Okay, on the first one, I'd say I don't have a strong opinion, other than I think there needs to be transparency around the entire life cycle assessment. One knock I have on the packaging industry in general is there's not these standard measurements that I think, when you think about food, right? We've got, how many carbs, sugar, fat, protein, fiber,
right.
Percentage of your daily. Like with packaging, it's a little bit mystified. And I think because it's not as straightforward, it's the consumer understands a lot more about those different food elements and how much you should have. On the packaging side, maybe plastic is right for this, maybe it's not. It depends on how you're using it. Is it reusable? Those sorts of things. But the average consumer, we've lived in a throwaway society for so long, has never really had to think about, okay, material depends on how much of it I'm consuming, what happens to it afterwards. And so tying back to the circular supply chain, there's more that goes into that. There's energy consumed, transporting, cleaning, repackaging, getting ready. So it's hard for me to say if that's good or bad, because I don't have a way of comparing that versus, is it going to recycling? Is it going to a landfill? Some of that's because it's apples to oranges comparison, and some of that's just because the information's not transparent. So I don't have strong feelings on that. I'd love to hear your take as somebody who's probably examined it more closely, but that's kind of where I am, probably giving you more of a consumer's perspective.
Well, and that's so necessary. The consumer is the most important person in this whole thing, because if they don't take the packaging and bring it back to the place or get it back to the place that needs to clean it, it doesn't work. Circular packaging becomes way more adverse to the environment than it's helpful, because it's so much more material, thicker walled aluminums, glass, things that, can be used dozens or hundreds of times. That's a great concept. But if the consumer keeps it or throws it away, zonk, it's red light. It doesn't work.
And how many cycles do you need for it to bring, quote, payback, in terms of the added expense, the added energy consumption? I don't think that's always clear. Is it, if I use this for 2 years this way, it's now positive. So yeah, just questions around that.
I think, like most things in sustainability, it's a great concept, and I totally support it if it's done correctly. My friend Avelio told me that reusable grocery bag has to be used 30 times before it's more environmentally friendly than that single-use plastic bag. I mean, how many people are really using them 30 times? I don't know. Maybe a lot. And I hope my mindset on that is wrong, but I hope people are using them and not getting a new one every week. That's the thing, is every brand wants you to have their reusable tote bag, right? And every show you go to, you get a new one, and it's just so much. There's so many of those non-woven reusable bags that I don't know how sustainable that is.
Well, when you think about the fact that, there's more grocery delivery, there's more curbside pickup and stuff like that. They're not packaging them in those bags because those bags are expensive, and they would want to get them back, but they're not getting that with these other delivery methods. And so you also have to adapt to the way people are shopping and consuming. And yeah, supply chains, I think it illustrates the point that supply chains are complicated, and there's a lot of considerations that go into them, and nothing's perfect, but it's a question of, what trade-offs are we comfortable with? And the transparency and even just the lexicon around sustainability and trade-offs isn't there today, but it's coming into the zeitgeist a bit. I think consumers are generally more aware, but I think, again, 10 years from now, looking forward, we'll be in a much better position.
I agree. It's exciting to see what will happen in the future and how we will work out these kinks, because I think these solutions are very valid and very reasonable, very possible. I would love to be able to just reuse everything and over again and bring it back to my local store. And, that makes sense to me. Or a milkman delivery system, or, things like that. I love it. But
there's certain
we're not
categories.
There yet.
Yeah, there's certain categories where it makes sense. I don't expect the Walmart Supercenter to become a zero packaging store overnight. But to your point, like, why can't I go refill this box of cereal that I get every single week, through one of those little dispenser systems? So just little steps like that. I think it's easy to imagine like that future state of utopia. When you look back at history, the other direction, it's generally compounding effects of these small wins. We get conditioned to it and it becomes status quo.
Right. Very exciting stuff. And I asked you about extended producer responsibility. Do you have any thoughts on that yet? I know it's a pretty new concept.
You're going to have to explain that concept to me, because I don't know if I've heard that.
Okay, so basically, extended producer responsibility is a system where the manufacturer of the packaging is required to do two things. One, have a certain level of PCR content in the packaging itself, which will spike demand for post-consumer materials, which we're already seeing. It's becoming short supply. And second, it makes sure that the manufacturer of the packaging knows that it will be recyclable easily, meaning monomaterials, things like that. Like, South Africa has already instituted this. I think they're one of the first. I think it goes live in November. Oregon and Maine have also laws on the books now that are on the governor's desk, getting ready to. So this is happening. This is not something that's an idea. It's something that, in my opinion, will get passed.
Yeah, I would say I'm generally pro this movement, because not that I love legislation and regulation, of everything, because I think, a lot of times, markets can drive this behavior. As you mentioned, it's already happening. Customers are demanding it. But that said, you can look at a lot of different mega industries where they needed a little nudge from Uncle Sam, whether it's, safety and automotive. We've already talked about, tobacco, for instance. There's things where I feel like the impact is so much larger than the consumer's understanding of it, where it really helps to have somebody come in and set some guardrails around what's acceptable. Once consumers catch up and they understand the impact holistically, it might not be as necessary. But yeah, I mean, packaging is a huge industry that creates so much unnecessary waste that I don't think it's a bad thing to push manufacturers in this direction and hold them accountable to an extent. We know the technologies are there. I've bought packaging. It's not that much more expensive if it's,
right.
I mean, it's so, yeah, I guess long-winded way of saying I'm pro this movement.
Yeah. Well, and the cool thing about it is larger companies are volunteering to do this. I'm very impressed with, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Unilever. They're on board already. They're agreeing to do this. They're leading this charge probably because they've taken some heat in the past, and this is a good PR move. But I don't care the reason. They're doing it, and it's a positive outcome. And they're also working to be ZWTL, which is zero waste to landfill from their production facilities, which I'm thrilled about that concept.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I was tempted to do what I criticized earlier and say, well, it's not enough because look how much waste they produce. But you're right. I mean, it's, you lead by example and it trickles down. They're going to put pressure on their suppliers. That creates more opportunity for, smaller companies and smaller brands that tap into that supply network. And so the little things that a PepsiCo can do can have big ripple effects through the entire industry. So it's definitely not something I would turn my nose up to. I think these bigger companies could invest more, could go faster, and I think we all want that. But let's kind of applaud the steps that they do take because they matter.
Well said. Totally agree. So how do we get a hold of you, Alex? What's the best?
Well, smoke signals are always fun, but it's probably faster to just hit my website up. It's alexreed.me. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, easy to find there. And I have a very, very small Twitter presence. I'm more of a voyeur there than an active content producer. But yeah, would love to hear from people and always up for chatting about this industry because it's just so stimulating.
Well, keep us posted on your next step. I'm excited to see what you do next because you've done so much already. And thank you again for your time today. I want to thank Landsberg Aurora for sponsoring this podcast. And yeah, we really appreciate your time, Alex.
Thank you so much, Cory. I had a blast chatting with you.
Thank you, sir.